Hello, everyone out there in cyberspace. Welcome back to Would You View It for a Scooby Snack? Like I said last week, we're starting a new series, the new Scooby-Doo movies. This series fits in well in tone and style with Scooby-Doo Where Are You, with two main differences. First, the episodes are twice as long, and second, each one has guest stars. Was it any good? Let's find out. The first episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies was Ghastly Ghost Town, premiering on September 9th, 1972. The gang is on the road in a desert when Shaggy believes he's seeing mirages, seeing an alligator, a camel, and a gorilla. Driving on, they see a sign that says, "Monsters ahead, 1,000 yards," which honestly I can only imagine they appreciate, given how often they see monsters. Soon, a giant bat drives them off the road and they get stuck in a sand dune. They start walking down the road and see a T-Rex on the cliff in the distance. And yeah, it's going to be that kind of episode. As they go further down the road, they run into the wild animals again, as well as their handlers, Curly, Moe, and Larry. That's right! The guests of this episode are the Three Stooges. The Stooges promise to help them get out of the dune as soon as they get the animals back to town, so the gang follows them. The Stooges are running a ghost town as an amusement park, and things have been going very well. The animals escape from their cages constantly, the bat flies overhead every night, and Tyrone the T-Rex is on the loose, despite supposedly being hollow and stationary. While talking, they meet Rhino, a giant man who takes care of the animals and who grunts when Moe makes Curly try to fire him. Apparently he's been acting suspicious, though they don't say how. The gang volunteers to solve the mystery. Not like they're going anywhere anytime soon. The Stooges take them to Tyrone, but run off when it roars to life. They're caught by a man in a cowboy hat who wants to run the gang off for trespassing, but is interrupted when Scooby finds a secret door to Tyrone. They all go up and find a tape recorder that's been making the roars. The man introduces himself as Amos Crunch, the Stooges' manager. He destroys the tape and they all go back to town. We get to meet Curly's pet bat, Dingbat, which goes crazy whenever Crunch is around. Make a note of that, it's important later. They thank the gang for their help, but Fred points out that they still don't know about the giant bat. What's more, Velma is missing. They split up into their usual parties with an extra group for the Stooges. Also, the animators mistakenly put Velma in the shirts as well. Not that it matters, because Amos drops her down a trapdoor. Seriously, this show made me think trapdoors and secret passages would be way more of a thing in my life. The Stooges encounter the ghosts for the episode, a model Native American, Geronimo, and an Old West gunslinger come to life. Meanwhile, in the desert, a cactus tries to kill Daphne and Fred by putting a hole in their canteen. Fred tries to chase it, but whoever's inside escapes, leaving behind the costume. And we briefly return to Velma, who has fallen down into an old mine. Back above ground, the rest are all in the ghost town together again, though it's never shown how they regrouped. Amidst thunder and lightning and the earth rumbling, the ghostly Native American dances at them in the desert. The Stooges run into the mine to escape, while the others wonder why Crunch and Rhino are playing cards while they look for Velma. But any confrontation is stopped when the gunslinger shows up. Fred and Daphne are dropped down the same trapdoor and land on top of Velma, while Shaggy and Scooby get chased. They accidentally knock the gunslinger into a well, and it turns out to be a robot. Down in the mine, the Stooges and the gang find each other and try to find a way out. Dingbat glows in the dark but goes berserk, and part of the mine collapses, further trapping them. The Stooges try to dig their way out, but soon decide to call for help through the air shaft instead. Shaggy and Scooby hear and go to where they think Rhino and Crunch are playing cards to help, but they turn out to be dummies, and they end up using Tyrone to dig them out. Somewhere else, the Native American and the gunslinger feel the heat and decide to run. They load up the giant bat and fly out of the secret hangar in the ghost town. Scooby and Shaggy give chase to Tyrone, and in the process, the Stooges get knocked into the projector that showed the Native American dancing earlier. Scooby and Shaggy catch the criminals, who are really Crunch and Rhino. They had been stealing uranium, and the uranium dust had been causing Dingbat's echolocation to go haywire. I couldn't find any real-life evidence backing that up despite literal seconds of searching, but it was nicely foreshadowed. This episode benefits from repeated viewings. It doles out solutions nicely, but it could do more with its runtime, so maybe too. Next up is the dynamic Scooby-Doo affair, premiering on September 16th, 1972. We find our heroes driving down the road when they hit a rock and the headlights go out. As they're looking at the damage, a plane flies over them, nearly missing them. It lands and a truck drives out carrying a crate. The gang, of course, has to investigate. And man, are they lucky that this is a kid's show, not like Archer or something. Otherwise, this would end badly. They take a shortcut and find the truck at an old farmhouse. Once the coast is clear, they go inside. They find the crate strapped to the floor, but before they can open it, they hear someone coming into the house, and so they hide. Shaggy tries to grab a chair to defend himself, but finds that everything is bolted to the floor. It turns out to be Batman and Robin, the Adam West versions, so it's not like Shaggy would have stood a chance anyway. Not unless you believe the memes. Batman and Robin were patrolling Gotham when they picked up the plane signal and came to investigate. Just then, the lady of the house, Mrs. Barker, comes down and asks what's going on. They explain about the crate, and she says that someone must have thought that the old house was abandoned and left it there. Batman opens the crate and finds a toy punch clown. Gee, I wonder who the bad guy's going to be in this one. Scooby accidentally breaks it, and inside is a pile of money. Perfect copies of $5 bills, down to the last detail, except that Abraham Lincoln is wearing a turtleneck sweater. Velma finds the tire tracks of the truck outside, and the gang and Batman and Robin decide to follow them. But Mrs. Barker warns them of ghosts in the junkyard.
Some folks say the spirits of the departed wander around the auto graveyard at night.
Man, they're not even trying to be subtle. They go to the junkyard and find the hooded man. Fred almost captures him, but gets a hood thrown over his head, letting the villain escape. They all decide to go back to the farmhouse and get the money to Gotham. But when they return, the farmhouse is gone and the Batmobile is missing, so they're forced to go there in the Mystery Machine with Batman driving and the gang blindfolded. At the Batcave, they use their computer to track the Batmobile, which is parked outside the Batman and Robin Museum. Which is actually pretty clever. Edgar Allan Poe would be proud. They all go to the museum, but Batman and Robin make the gang stay outside. Inside, the Joker and the Penguin try to scare off Batman and Robin with fake ghosts. I guess this exhibit is also a haunted house? It doesn't work, but they do trick them into falling down a shaft where even their grappling hooks won't save them. Outside, Fred uses his super clairvoyance to get a hunch that the duo are in trouble, and leads the gang inside to save them. A whole lot of hijinks ensue. In the end, the Joker and Penguin dress in skeleton costumes so convincing that everyone gets scared and runs. Except for Fred, who gets dragged along anyway. But then Scooby remembers that A, he's a dog, and B, skeletons are made of bones. The tables are turned when he chases the bad guys, and they fall into their own trap with Batman and Robin. Captured, they explain that while they distributed the counterfeit money, they didn't make it, so the gang are forced to return to Mrs. Barker's house. And I've only just realized they were surprisingly blasé about her disappearing. The farmhouse is back when they return. They all go in, sans Scooby and Shaggy, who once again are sick of dealing with ghosts and monsters. But a scary sound leads to them discovering a branch that flips the house into the ground, and they run in to tell the others. Batman and Robin find a second lever that flips the house, and soon they're all in the hooded man's lair. They enter a warehouse filled with toys. 'Cause shut up, they have their reasons. Actually, I joke, but the scene is reminiscent of the scene from The Great Mouse Detective, my favorite Disney movie. If anything, this episode does more with the setting than the movie did. Anyway, after some hijinks, they catch the hooded man, who is in reality, get your surprise faces ready, Mrs. Barker. This episode is pretty much a checklist of everything I don't like in Scooby-Doo. They waste too much time with cartoon humor, the answer is incredibly obvious, and some of the acting is clunky. So someone tell me why I love this episode so much. I guess it hits the right level of pulp cheesiness. I'd totally watch it again. Next we have Wednesday is Missing, which aired on September 23rd, 1970. And if you bet we're finding our heroes on the road with the Mystery Machine about to be broken down, well, you'd be right. This series is probably the origin of the fan theory that the gang is going to Canada. If you hadn't heard of it, the gist of it is that Fred is a draft dodger and escaping, Daphne is his girlfriend and choosing to run away with him, Shaggy is a wannabe Jack Kerouac, and Velma is a student protester along for the ride. I personally don't buy it. One, they never actually make it to Canada and don't seem to be in a hurry to get anywhere in particular. Two, this episode talks about them leaving their garage for this trip, so I think they just like to get around. Still, it's an interesting theory to entertain. Anyway, this time around, they run off the road under heavy fog. Soon another car comes by, tearing down the road, stopping only to tell the gang that they were housekeepers at a spooky-looking house down the road, but left because the family was just too weird. They drive off, leaving the gang to ponder why the house looks familiar as they try to get the Mystery Machine back on the road. But it's of no use. The battery is dead. Note to self, go add an entry to the alleged car article on TV Tropes. It's getting dark when a giant green man tells them to follow him. They do, recognizing the man even though he doesn't introduce himself. We cut to the house and find Gomez Adams of the Addams family literally pacing up the walls while his wife Morticia tries to calm him down. I'm going to assume that most of you know who the Addams family are, but for those of you who don't, it was a gothic sitcom that ran from 1964 to 1966. It was a risky show for the era where Star Trek had to cover up women's belly buttons, and people still thought Satan was writing rock and roll music, with references to Lucifer and the occult, but it managed to find a devoted audience and still has a cult following to this day. Shout out to my friend Alex. This episode probably served as the inspiration for the animated reboot the network would later air. While that one recast most of the original TV actors, this one still had all of the adults back, including Ted Cassidy, who played Harvey Logan in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Caroline Jones from the 7-Year Itch, and John Astin, famous for being legendary comedic god John Astin. The only new actors for this episode were the kids, with Cindy Henderson playing the eponymous Wednesday, and Jodie Foster, yep, that one, playing her brother Pugsley. Back to the episode. Gomez is upset because the housekeepers have quit, making it impossible for him and Morticia to go on their trip to the Okefenokee Swamp. They're just about to unpack their bags when Lurtz, the butler, comes back with the gang. Now, the gang has seen the Addams family on TV and are spooked out enough to want to leave, but, with their usual obliviousness, they end up missing the gang's objections, and they find themselves with the job anyway. While they're having dinner, a giant bird flies over the house. Then the power is cut, and when it comes back on, Wednesday is missing, hence the title. In her place, they find a note warning the Addams family to leave, signed The Vulture. I have to say, I'm a little disappointed with how the writers are handling Shaggy's character in this series. He's always been a coward, but here they have him trying to run off, leaving Wednesday kidnapped, which to me seems unlike his character, which in the previous series could be very heroic when the situation called for it. Most of the rest of the episode involves them exploring the house. Again, this is something that on paper would bore me, but here it works. Animation allowed for them to do things with the Addams family the live-action show couldn't achieve at the time. We do get a short scene with Morticia and Gomez in the swamp, and I do wish they'd done more with the characters here, given that they were truly the entertaining parts of their show. They eventually find Wednesday playing in the attic with her pet spider. She tells the gang that she was levitated there when the lights went out, and that she's seen the vulture. And speak of the devil, the vulture dive bombs them and drops an egg with another warning to leave inside. When Gomez and Morticia return soon after, the gang explains the situation to them. They have no idea who would want them to leave, so the gang looks for clues. They never do find any, but while investigating the basement, Fred accidentally sets off all of Uncle Fester's fireworks, shooting down the vulture in the process. It turns out to be a helicopter flown by the original housekeepers. Worried about the effect the Addamses were having on the neighborhood kids, they tried to scare them off. They offer to let themselves be arrested, but Velma has a better idea. They introduce the kids to the Addams family, and they hit it off. The kids love playing with all the weird things in the house, and the housekeepers change their minds about the family. Overall, this episode is pretty fun, but like I said, it could have done more with the characters. My ruling is 2 Scooby snacks. And now we come to The Frickard Fracas, premiering on September 30th, and don't ask me how many times I had to say that before I got a usable take. This time around, the Mystery Machine is low on gas, and when they stop to fill up, they meet Jonathan Winters.
Jonathan who? The what?
I think this was where the series first started courting older audiences. I mean, I know who Jonathan Winters is now, but this was the first kids show he ever did. I don't know, maybe somebody from the 70s can tell me. He starts out by pretending to be a gas station attendant, but soon admits he's just playing around while he waits on a part for his car. With the promise of a home-cooked chicken dinner, he gets a ride from the kids to his friend's farm, and also gets them to agree to help her out. Daphne is self-aware enough that she says it'll be a nice break from hauntings, but not enough to realize it's going to happen anyway. And in the background, a scarecrow watches them. They get into a misunderstanding with Vernon, the handyman, who thinks they're after a formula, but Winters tricks him into letting them see Grandma anyway. She explains that people are after a secret feed her dead husband hid on the land, which made chickens grow to a giant size in no time. She's looking for it herself as she's about to open her own fried chicken franchise. While talking, Scooby sees 2 men looking through the window and gets scared. But before he can explain, Grandma's lawyer, Simon Shaky, comes in to tell her about her loan. It was turned down, so she throws him out. Vernon takes them outside to show them what they'll be doing in the morning, and they find the 2 men lurking around again. They split up, and so do our heroes. I said earlier that I wish they'd change up the parties for variety's sake, and while they haven't so far in the series, the guest stars have helped to spice things up. Winters goes with Shaggy and Scooby, while Grandma goes with the others. Grandma's group gets tricked and confused by the Scarecrow. Daphne and Velma try to grab him, but it doesn't work. We also find out that Fred is supposed to look something like singer Glenn Campbell. Winters proves to be as much of a coward as Shaggy and Scooby. A whole lot of hijinks ensue while they all chase the Scarecrow and the 2 men, which culminate in the two men scaring themselves and hiding in a well and a barrel of water. They turn out to be musicians who want to rent the farm for a festival. They could never talk with Grandma directly because Vernon always scared them off. And neither of them are the Scarecrow. Grandma agrees to the deal, and the case is back on. They split up and all end up in the cornfield to look around. Back at the farm, the Scarecrow uses a map to try and dig for the secret feed. Shaggy and Scooby get scared, not knowing the others are there, and run back to the farm. They hide in a barn and find Winters. They all know that the Scarecrow is lurking around and try to scare him off by doing impersonations to make it seem like the place is surrounded by police and soldiers. I've seen variations of this gag in other shows from this era, like Three's Company and MASH. Makes me wonder where it came from originally. But the Scarecrow finds them out and they run. The gang and the Scarecrow chase each other back and forth, with the Scarecrow fleeing into the silo. The rest go to trap him while Shaggy and Scooby hide in the chicken coop, where they find the magic feed and accidentally create a 10-foot rooster. Stop looking at me, go make your own joke. They get chased by the rooster while the Scarecrow falls down into the grain. Winter releases the grain and the gang goes to the bottom to catch him. But it lands on Scooby and Shaggy instead, and the Scarecrow mounts the rooster and rides it. The gang, Winters and Grandma, chase after, needing the rooster for the restaurant. Scooby gets onto it too, and the chase is on. It turns out that the feed is a bust. After some riding, the rooster shrinks down to its original size, and they capture the Scarecrow. Grandma thinks it's Vernon and scolds him, but it turns out to be the lawyer who wanted to prevent Grandma from opening up her restaurants. Vernon went for the police and arrives with them just in time. Winter warns Scooby to stay out of show business, and the episode ends. Overall, it was pretty good, but it could have used some trimming, so 2, 3, somewhere around there for Scooby Snack. Up next is Guess Who's Not Coming to Dinner, premiering October 7th, 1972. This isn't going to be a good one, folks. The gang is on their way to Pinecrest Lodge, but gets lost. When a downed tree blocks their path, they're forced to walk, and, as they do, Scooby notices that they're being followed by a lumberjack. But when he sneezes, his beard falls off, and Scooby recognizes him as Don Knotts. He tries to tell the rest of the gang, but none of them believe him. Eventually, they make it to a place called Moody Manor. They decide to go to the door and ask for directions. Don Knotts has beat them there and disguises himself as the butler. He greets them and says that Moody isn't around, but his friend is there and is expecting them. While he goes off to fetch the friend, the gang looks for a secret passage. They do find one, but ultimately end up right back where they started from. Sailor Phineas, still Knotts, shows up and mistakes the gang for Captain Moody's nieces and nephews. He takes them to dinner, but nobody besides Scooby eats, believing the food might be poisoned. But, for some reason, even that's not enough to scare the gang off, who accepts the invitation to stay for the night. Phineas goes off to find the maid, who comes back, still Knotts, and leads them to their rooms. A record number of hijinks ensue, where Knotts also pretends to be the ghost of Moody for reasons unknown, until he blows his cover in a move worthy of Three's Company by showing up with parts of 2 costumes. Finally, with 15 minutes left in the episode, we get to the mystery. It's not clear whether this is the real Don Knotts pretending to be another character, or it's just a look-alike, but he calls himself Detective Homer Pipsqueak. He tells them that Moody called him earlier, afraid for his life, but disappeared mid-call. After he's convinced the gang aren't the nieces and nephews he's looking for, he enlists their help. They split up, and amazingly, this episode still finds time for more hijinks. Eventually, they all end up in the old mill, where they're chased by 2 ghosts, and we get what I think is our first true example of Scooby-Doo doors. I guess that's sort of interesting. They find the captain and capture the 2 ghosts, who are really his 2 nephews after their inheritance. This episode was a chore to watch. It's boring, and the only bright side is that I never have to watch it again. Thankfully, Don Knotts will guest star again. Hopefully it's a better. Our next episode is A Good Medium is Rare from October 14th. And for a change, the gang isn't on the road. This time, they're coming out of a scary movie, where they find a poodle with a diamond collar. They find its address written on the inside and go to take it home. The home is a creepy mansion with a talking gargoyle on the gate, and Scoob and Shaggy are more on edge than usual because of the movie, but Fred tells the gargoyle their business and they're let in. The butler takes them to see the lady of the house, comedienne Phyllis Diller. Diller promises them a reward for bringing back her pet, but shows them around first, showing off all her macabre collections in haunted halls. Someone is watching them from the paintings, but only Shaggy sees, and none of them notices someone pulling stones from the floor, trying to get them to fall. And it's pretty funny to see the eyes get angrier and angrier every time they narrowly miss. The lights go out and Diller lights a candle, blaming it on the ghost of her second husband. Lucas, the butler, tells them that there's been a break-in, and they all go to investigate. Phyllis says the thief was after her jewels, but she has a secret hiding. They find a bag with the initials MM on it near an open window. Someone snatches the bag and runs off into the cemetery, with the girls and Fred close behind. They're chased by another gargoyle and hide in a tomb, taking their turn for some hijinks. Back at the mansion, with the gang reunited, Diller says her fourth husband is behind the attempted theft. Then a magician from the Magic Manor arrives with a message for Diller from the spirit world by way of Madame Zoker. They leave for the manor in separate cars, and once there, they meet Alberto, who takes them to Madame Zokar, an obvious fake. She conjures the ghost of Wilbur, Diller's first husband, who warns about the jewels and tricks her into revealing the location of the jewels and that the safe can only be opened at midnight. Fred and Velma realize the trick and try to get Phyllis out of there, but forces conspire against them. I think this is the first time the hijinks, which are no different than they would be in any other episode, serve a purpose beyond just padding the runtime. Everything is meant to keep them from getting back to the mansion. They eventually escape by posing as delivery workers, but they're separated on the road and the gang is delayed when a phony detour tricks them onto a river raft. When they finally get back to the mansion, the place is ransacked and Phyllis and Lucas are missing. They search the mansion and are chased by two masked men. They hide and turn the tables on them, following them until they find Diller tied up in a grandfather clock. They're staking out the room with the safe when the police arrive, having been called by a neighbor, and arrest Alberto and his accomplice. This episode uses classic Scooby-Doo tropes to their fullest and justifies them. It was also nice to have multiple possible suspects and not know which one of them really did it until the very end. Go ahead and watch it for a Scooby snack. And now we come to Sandy Duncan's Jekyll and Hyde, first airing on October 21st and featuring the franchise's second take on the story. We find the gang driving through a studio looking for the set of the third and latest Jekyll and Hyde movie. I guess even in the 70s, remakes and sequels were a problem. Fred is saying that the place is going to be torn down after the movie is made when a ghost jumps out at them, forcing them off the road. They're looking for help getting their mystery machine up when Sandy Duncan runs to them, screaming. Back on set, she explains she was being chased by something and that many strange things have been happening lately. We get to meet a whole slew of characters, including leading man Duke and his stand-in Slats, manager Mr. Thayer, and director Van Henstone. We also meet Sandy's stand-in Shirley, who is a dead ringer for Daphne. But I'm sure that won't be important. While waiting for filming to start, Shirley reveals some gossip that could implicate almost anyone on set, and the gang wonder why the ghost included them. Filming begins, and Sandy is nearly killed by set pieces rigged up as a trap, but Scooby, in love with her, comes to the rescue. This is the last straw for Shirley, who walks off. Daphne gets roped into replacing her, and with her involved and filming done for the day, the gang begins their investigation. Scooby tries to show the gang what happened when he rescued Sandy, when the ghost drops him and Shaggy down a trapdoor into his escape tunnel, which might not have been the wisest idea, giving them a clue. Trapped, Shaggy and Scooby follow the tunnel, while the others try to follow their voices from above. They come to the end of the tunnel and end up in a desert set, and hijinks ensue. Shaggy and Scooby get terrorized by a sheik, a mummy, and a mechanical lion. In Shanghai, Fred and Daphne fight a pirate and a dragon mech. In Philadelphia, Velma gets chased by the pirate and runs into Fred and Daphne. And I think this is the first time Velma was in her own party. They all meet up in Alaska when they trap Shaggy and Scooby, thinking they were a wolf man. They get chased by a bear into an old West ghost town and get locked in a bank and in a jail when they're chased by the franchise's fourth Native American stereotype. They break out in the morning and get found by Sandy and the others. Back on set, they stake things out, looking for the ghost. While they're switching out actors for stand-ins, someone dressed as Hyde grabs Daphne, and by the time the gang notices something's wrong, they're gone, with a note telling them to stop the sale of the studio if they ever want to see Sandy Duncan again. Seems the ghost got confused as well. Van Henstone calls the police and the studio is locked down, while the gang and Sandy look for Daphne. Scooby stumbles upon another of the ghost tunnels. They find Hyde's cape while Sandy and Scooby fall down another trapdoor and end up in a prop room where they find the newspapers and signs used to make the note. They go back to the tunnel to find the others. They run into each other and follow Daphne's screams to a mountain castle. The chase is on and they corner Hyde and Daphne in a mausoleum, using Sandy's voice to trick Hyde into opening the door for Shaggy and Fred to capture him. The ghost turns out to be Zyra Fairchild, a disappeared silent film star who'd been living in the studio a la Phantom of the Opera. Sandy and the gang convince the studio to give him a job on the basis of his talent. The gang gets to be extras, and Scooby wants to stay with Sandy and to be in show business, but she scares him off with talk of the wild animals that will be in her next movie, and he decides, surprisingly, he'd rather chase ghosts. This is Scooby-Doo in a microcosm, with exotic locations and weird villains, to the point I wonder if this was snippets they couldn't work into other episodes. Again, the mystery is compelling with a lot of suspects, though I do wish the idea of Zyra had been introduced. Our final episode for this round is The Secret of Shark Island, premiering on October 28th, 1972. We find the gang on the way to the beach, bemoaning the weather ruining their day, when up ahead they see another car with a flat tire. Inside are Sonny, doing his impression of the most annoying man on the face of the earth, and Cher. Seriously, he said, "Little Ol" so many times, I had to make sure I wasn't in a Bill Murray movie. Also, they call them the Bonos at first, and it disappoints me immensely that no one's made a Sonny Bono meme. They're on their way to a hotel for their second honeymoon. The gang agrees to give them a ride, crossing a bridge with spots for sharks to go through to get there, and discovering the hotel looks nothing like the brochure. But with the weather bad, they've got no choice but to stay the night. Sonny puts them all up, and we meet the hotel manager, Mr. Meekley, and his chambermaid, Matilda, who is clearly modeled off of Helga from Nowhere to Hide. While showing them to their rooms, Mr. Meekley tells them of the legend of the shark god, who is said to be waiting for the day to lead the sharks in victory over the humans. But he doesn't believe it himself, and uses the story to wave off any of the gang's fears. That night, Velma and Daphne see a shark monster lurking in the rocks, and call in Fred to see. They all hear the conch wail that Meekley said would signal the shark god's return. Sonny gets scared by Matilda lurking outside their door, while Scooby and Shaggy explore the cellar looking for food. The next morning they try to leave, but find that the road is underwater and won't be drivable until the next tide. With nothing else to do, they split up and explore the island. Velma and Daphne find fin tracks leading out of the ocean. Meanwhile, Fred, Sonny, and Cher find a cache of ancient rum bottles that made the sound they heard the night before. But Fred wonders why something so valuable would be left behind. Scooby and Shaggy find a paddle boat and take it for a ride. Through a window in the bottom, they see a sunken ship, and then the shark god comes to chase them. They regroup and see a kelp dregger, but when they try to signal it in hopes of getting off the island, it vanishes. Mr. Meekley is gone too when they go to look for him, finding more footprints in the lobby in his place, so they split up again. Sonny and Cher find a secret passage down to the cellar, where they meet up with Scooby and Shaggy and encounter the shark god. Fred and the girls take a set of rickety old stairs down the cliff where the boat vanished, but fall into the ocean when they give way. They discover the sharks that have been circling the area are fake. They swim to a cavern where they find the kelp dregger loading gold coins into cauldrons on a conveyor belt and avoid getting captured by the crane operator. Shaggy and the others find a secret passage to the place and bury the shark god under gold. Fred goes to save them from the crane operator and is surprised when it turns out to be Mr. Meekley. Matilda shows up and, in a clearly male voice, orders everyone back to the hotel under the authority of Agent Matt Hidalgo. Meekley and his henchmen were melting down gold coins and disguising them as trash can lids to smuggle them off the island. This episode is competent, but not one of my favorites. I'd say 3 Scooby snacks. And that's it for now. Hope to see you next week.